The rain came down in sheets over North Philly, turning the cracked asphalt into a mirror of flickering streetlights. It was a Thursday night, late, past 9 p.m., and the air smelled like wet concrete and burnt rubber from a tire fire someone had lit down the block. A crowd of maybe 50 people huddled under a sagging canopy outside the North Philly Arts Hub, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, "Save Our Kids," in bold red letters. Lila Brooks stood on a milk crate, her denim jacket soaked through, her voice booming through a megaphone scratched up from years of use. "Hudson Global thinks they can just roll in here and bulldoze us," she shouted, her words cutting through the drumming rain. "This ain't just a building, it's where our kids find their voice, where they learn they're worth something. We're not letting it go without a fight." The crowd roared back. Moms with umbrellas, teens in hoodies, old guys from the barber shop down the street, all stomping their feet, their breath puffing out in the cold. Lila's dark eyes blazed, her braids plastered to her face, water dripping off her chin. She was 31, all fire and steel, the kind of woman who could stare down a storm and make it blink first. For 6 months, she'd been rallying this neighborhood against the gentrification creeping in from Center City, fancy condos and coffee shops swallowing up corner stores and playgrounds. Tonight was different, though. Tonight felt like a breaking point. Nathan Hudson stood at the edge of the crowd, half hidden in the shadow of a busted street lamp. His hoodie was drenched, clinging to his broad shoulders, and his sneakers, $200 Nikes he'd bought to blend in, squished with every step. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be 30 stories up in his glass tower downtown, sipping bourbon and signing off on the next big deal. But for months, he'd been Nate, the quiet guy who showed up to help at Lila's theater program, hauling props and cracking bad jokes to make her laugh. Tonight, he'd come to warn her. Hudson Global's board had greenlit the demolition of the Arts Hub, and he couldn't stop it. Not yet. He edged closer, heart hammering, rehearsing what he'd say. "Lila, it's me. I screwed up. I can fix this." But before he could open his mouth, a voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Lila, wait!" Tasha Carter shoved through the crowd, her raincoat flapping, phone clutched in her hand. She was Lila's right-hand woman at the hub, short, fierce, with a buzz cut and a glare that could melt steel. "You need to see this." Lila lowered the megaphone, frowning as Tasha thrust the phone at her. The screen glowed with a grainy photo. Nathan, or Nate, stepping out of a sleek black SUV downtown, captioned, "Nathan Hudson, CEO of Hudson Global, spotted at North Philly site." Below it, a headline from the Philly Inquirer, "Billionaire's next target, North Philly Arts Hub." The crowd hushed, heads craning. Lila's eyes flicked over the screen, then up to Nathan, who'd frozen mid-step. Her face went still, like the calm before a hurricane. "Tasha, what is this?" Tasha spun around, pointing straight at him, her voice loud enough to carry over the rain. "That's him, Lila, right there! That's Nathan Hudson, the bastard who's tearing this place down!" Every eye turned to Nathan. He felt the weight of it, like a spotlight pinning him to the wet pavement. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping. "Get him out! You liar! Sell out!" Someone chucked a soggy flyer that hit his chest and stuck there. He didn't move, just locked eyes with Lila, willing her to hear him out. "Lila, wait," he started, stepping forward, hands up. His voice cracked, raw with panic. "It's not what you think. Not what I think?" She snapped, jumping off the crate, boots splashing in a puddle. She stormed toward him, megaphone still dangling from one hand, her other fist clenched. "You've been here for months, Nate, or whatever the hell your name is, moving props, drinking my shitty coffee, acting like you gave a damn. And all this time you're the one holding the wrecking ball." "No!" he shouted louder than he meant, rain streaming down his face. "I didn't want this. I came here to stop it." "Stop it?" She laughed, sharp and bitter, cutting him off. "You're Hudson Global, man. You are it. You think I'm stupid. You think I wouldn't figure out the guy who's been playing buddy with my kids is the same one signing their eviction notice? The crowd pressed in, a wall of angry faces. Mrs. Jenkins from the bodega, Tyrell from the basketball court, kids he'd helped with their lines. Nathan's throat tightened. He'd never felt so small, not even when he'd walked away from his first $1 million deal. Lila, please, just hear me out. I'm not here to hurt you. Tasha shoved between them, eyes blazing. Save it, Hudson. You don't get to talk your way out of this. You've been slumming it down here, pretending to care, while your suits uptown cash out on our homes. Get the hell out before we drag you out. Lila, he tried again, voice breaking, reaching for her arm. She yanked back like he'd burned her, her eyes wet. Not from the rain, he realized, but from something deeper. Betrayal. Pain. He'd seen that look before, in his mom's eyes, when his dad sold her dreams for a quick buck. It gutted him. You're a liar, she said, quiet now, the words slicing through the noise. Everything you said, every laugh, every late night, it was fake. You're just another rich asshole who thinks he can buy anything, even us. It wasn't fake, he said, desperate, stepping closer despite Tasha's glare. You're the realest thing I've ever known. I swear Enough, she yelled, turning away, her voice cracking. Get out of my sight, Nathan Hudson, and don't come back. The crowd surged, pushing him back, hands shoving, voices cursing. He stumbled, catching himself on a lamppost, rain blurring his vision. Lila walked back to the crate, shoulders squared, megaphone lifting again like nothing had happened. But he saw her hand shake just for a second before she started rallying the crowd once more. Nathan stood there, soaked and shivering, watching her disappear into the fight he'd helped create. 6 months ago, he'd walked into her world looking for a deal. Now, he was walking out of it, losing the one thing his billions couldn't buy. How the hell had it come to this? The rain was still pounding the windshield when Nathan slumped into his car 2 blocks away, the engine humming as he cranked the heat. His phone buzzed. Mark Reynolds, his CFO, probably pissed he'd skipped another board meeting. He ignored it, staring at the foggy glass, Lila's voice echoing in his head. You're a liar. He wiped a hand over his face, wet with rain, and something else he wouldn't admit. It hadn't started like this. 6 months back, he'd been a different guy. Or at least he'd thought so. Back then he was just Nathan Hudson, CEO of Hudson Global, king of Philly's skyline, untouchable in his glass tower downtown. He'd built an empire from scratch. Well, from his dad's seed money and a hell of a lot of ruthlessness, turning abandoned lots into luxury high-rises, making billions while the city changed under his hands. But it was empty. The penthouse views, the private jets, the women who smiled for the cameras. They didn't fill the hole his mom left when she died, broken by his dad's betrayal. That's where it began. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday night just like this one, when he'd pulled up to the North Philly Arts Hub in his Range Rover, scouting it for a new project. He'd expected a quick in and out, check the site, sign the papers, move on. Instead, he'd seen her. Lila Brooks, standing on that rickety stage, teaching a kid how to project his voice, her laugh cutting through the damp air like a shot of light. He'd stayed, parked in the shadows, watching, and then he'd come back. Not as Nathan Hudson, but as Nate, some guy in a hoodie who just wanted to help. He leaned back in the driver's seat, the memory sharp as a blade. That first night, he'd stood in the back, rainwater dripping off his coat, feeling something he hadn't in years. Alive. Now, it was all crashing down, and he had no one to blame but himself. How did a guy with everything end up with nothing? That's the story I'm going to tell you. How a billionaire found the one thing he couldn't buy, and how it nearly broke him. Man, that showdown in the rain was wild. Did Lila's fire or Nathan's desperation hit you hardest? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this all started, and drop a comment. Who's got your vote, Lila or Nathan? Let's hear it. 6 months ago, Philadelphia was drowning in a late spring rain that wouldn't quit. The city smelled like wet asphalt and fryer grease from the food trucks parked along Broad Street, their neon signs buzzing through the haze. Nathan Hudson sat in the driver's seat of his Range Rover, parked across from the North Philly Arts Hub, a beat-up brick box of a building wedged between a laundromat and a vacant lot. The windshield wipers thumped a steady rhythm, clearing streaks of water just enough for him to squint at the place through the downpour. He wasn't here to stay. He was here to scout. Hudson Global had its eye on North Philly for months. The plan was simple. Scoop up cheap land, knock down the old stuff, and throw up a shiny new mixed-use development. Condos, a Whole Foods, maybe a yoga studio for the hipsters already sniffing around from Fishtown. The Arts Hub was just another checkbox on the list, a crumbling relic his board wanted gone by fall. Nathan had driven out himself, no driver, no suit, to see what they were dealing with. He figured 10 minutes tops, snap some pics, jot some notes, get back to Center City before the traffic turned to hell. He killed the engine, the quiet settling in heavy, and stepped out into the rain. His $200 Nikes sank into a puddle right off the bat, soaking his socks, and he cursed under his breath. "Great start," he muttered, tugging his hoodie up to shield his face. At 39, Nathan was still built like the college linebacker he'd been, broad shoulders, solid frame, but he hadn't dressed the part tonight. No tailored suit, no Rolex, just a gray hoodie and jeans he'd dug out of a drawer he hadn't touched in years. He didn't want anyone clocking him as the guy who owned half the skyline. The Hub's front door creaked open when he pushed it, letting out a blast of warm air that smelled like old wood and cheap coffee. Inside, the place was a mess. Flickering fluorescent lights, scuffed floors, walls patched with duct tape and hope. A dozen kids, maybe 12 to 16, milled around a makeshift stage at the far end, laughing and shoving each other while a woman stood in the middle, directing traffic like a conductor with a wild orchestra. Nathan froze in the doorway, water dripping off his hood onto the floor. She was something else. Medium height, dark skin glowing under the harsh lights, her braids pulled back tight like she meant business. She wore a faded Temple University sweatshirt and jeans ripped at the knees. Not trendy rips, just worn out ones, and her voice carried over the chaos, warm but firm. "Tyrell, if you don't get your butt on that mark, I'm giving your line to Jamal. Let's go." The kid, Tyrell, skinny with a mop of curls, grinned and shuffled into place, muttering, "Chill, Miss Lila, I got it." The others cracked up, but they listened. She had that kind of pull, the kind you couldn't fake. Nathan slipped into the back row, sinking into a wobbly folding chair that creaked under his weight. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll, but his eyes stayed on her. Lila, he guessed, from what the kid called her. She wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't posing or preening like the women he usually ran into at galas or board meetings. She was just there, real as the rain outside, kneeling now to help a shy girl with big glasses adjust her stance. "Chin up, Keisha," she said, soft but steady. "You're not whispering to the floor. You're telling the world something. Make 'em hear you." Keisha nodded, timid at first, then straightened up and belted out her line. "To be or not to be," loud enough to bounce off the walls. The room erupted in cheers, and Lila's face split into a grin, deep and unguarded, the kind that hit Nathan square in the chest. He hadn't seen a smile like that since his mom, back when she'd drag him to community theater rehearsals, before his dad sold her out for a bigger office and a younger wife. He shifted in his seat, the chair squeaking again, and realized he'd forgotten why he was here. The phone in his hand was still dark. He hadn't taken a single picture. His board wanted this place gone, wanted him to turn it into profit margins and parking lots, But watching Lila, watching those kids light up, he felt something he hadn't in years. Alive. Not the fake rush of closing a deal, but something raw, messy, real. The rehearsal wrapped an hour later. Kids spilling out into the rain with their parents, shouting goodbyes over the splash of puddles. Nathan lingered, standing by a bulletin board covered in flyers, open mic nights, art classes, a plea for donations to fix the leaky roof. He didn't know why he stayed. Guys like him didn't linger. They showed up, made decisions, left. But when Lila started stacking chairs alone, he found himself walking over, hands shoved in his pockets. "Your work with these kids, it's pretty damn impressive," he said, his voice rougher than he meant, like he hadn't used it in a while. She glanced up, sharp eyes sizing him up in one quick sweep. Hoodie, sneakers, the faint outline of a guy who didn't quite fit. "Thanks," she said, setting a chair down with a clank. "You a parent, or just some dude in fancy kicks creeping on theater practice?" He laughed, a real one, rusty and unexpected, catching him off guard. "Neither. I just wanted to help out, maybe. Name's Nate." He stuck out a hand, leaving off the Hudson. That name would have ended this before it started. "Lila Brooks," she said, shaking his hand. Firm, no nonsense, no flirty linger. "Help's cool, but we need more than some rich guys swooping in with a savior complex. Lighting's shot, roof's leaking, and I'm not holding my breath for a miracle." He felt his face heat up, caught off guard again. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody dared. "Fair enough," he said, grinning despite himself. "What if I'm just a guy who liked what he saw tonight?" She raised an eyebrow, stacking another chair. "Then you're a rare breed, Nate. Most folks don't stick around for the mess." She grabbed her bag, slinging it over her shoulder. "I gotta lock up. You coming back? Or was this a one-time thing?" "Thursdays and Sundays, right?" he said, surprising himself. "I'll be here." She smirked, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Public space, free country, but maybe ditch the Nikes next time. Too loud for North Philly. He watched her head out, locking the door behind her, then climb into a dented Honda that coughed to life after 2 tries. Standing there in the rain, Nathan felt something shift, something dangerous, something he couldn't name yet. He dated models, CEOs, women who fit his world like pieces of a puzzle. But Lila Brooks? She was a whole different game, one he didn't know how to play, but couldn't walk away from. Back in his penthouse that night, the city sprawled out below him like a glittering chessboard. Center City's towers, the Squeal-Kill River snaking through. North Philly, a dark patch he'd always ignored. Nathan kicked off his soggy shoes, the hardwood floor cold under his feet, and poured a bourbon he didn't drink. His phone buzzed. Mark Reynolds, his CFO, texting. "North Philly numbers look good. Demo by fall?" He stared at it, thumb hovering, then tossed the phone onto the couch. He couldn't sleep. The rain tapped the windows, a steady drip that wouldn't let up, and all he could see was Lila, kneeling with Keisha, laughing with Tyrell, calling him out like he wasn't worth a damn. His mom used to do that. See people. Really see them, not their bank accounts or their titles. She died when he was 19, cancer eating her up after his dad bailed, leaving Nathan with a trust fund and a hole nothing filled. He'd built Hudson Global to prove he didn't need anyone, that money was enough. But tonight, in that busted-up hub, he'd felt something crack. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He'd go back, not as Nathan Hudson, not as the guy who could buy the block with a signature, but as Nate. Just Nate. He didn't know what he was chasing. Her, the feeling, some piece of himself he'd buried. But he knew one thing. He wasn't letting it go. He grabbed a pair of old Converse from the closet, the soles worn thin, and headed out. Thursday was 2 days away. He'd be there, rain or shine, lies or truth, because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. The North Philly Arts Hub was starting to feel like a second home to Nathan Hudson, or Nate, as he'd gotten used to hearing. It had been 3 months since that first rainy night, and Thursdays and Sundays had carved out a spot in his life he didn't know he'd needed. The place still smelled like old wood and burnt coffee, the roof still leaked into a bucket by the stage, and the kids still argued over who got the best lines. But it was Lila Brooks who kept him coming back. Her laugh, her fire, the way she'd call him out without blinking. He'd never met anyone like her, and it scared the hell out of him. Tonight was a Thursday. The air cool with that late summer bite Philly got before fall really kicked in. The moon hung low over the row houses, casting long shadows through the hub's cracked windows. Nathan hauled a stack of folding chairs across the floor, his Converse scuffing the worn boards, while Lila stood on stage, running lines with a girl named Keisha. "Louder, Keisha," she said, her voice steady but warm. "You're not just saying it, you're feeling it. Let's hear that heart." Keisha, all elbows and nerves, nodded and tried again, her voice cracking but growing. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me." The room clapped, Tyrell whooping loudest, and Lila grinned, hopping off the stage to give her a high five. "There it is, girl. You're killing it." Nathan smiled to himself, setting the chairs down with a clatter. He'd gotten good at this, blending in, keeping it low-key, keeping. No one here knew he could buy the block with a phone call, that his penthouse downtown had a view of the Squillkill River most people only saw on postcards. To them, he was just Nate, the guy who showed up with a toolbox and stayed late to lock up with Lila. It was the closest he'd felt to real in years. "Yo, Nate, you gonna stand there grinning like a goof or help me with these lights?" Tasha Carter's voice snapped him out of it. She stood by a ladder, arms crossed, her buzz cut catching the dim glow of the fluorescence. Tasha was Lila's shadow, short, tough, with a don't-mess-with-me vibe that made Nathan tread careful. She'd never warmed up to him, always watching him like he was a puzzle she couldn't crack. "Coming," he said, jogging over. He climbed the ladder, twisting a flickering bulb into place while Tasha held it steady below. "This thing's on its last legs. You need new fixtures." "Yeah, well, we need a lot of things," she shot back, her tone sharp. "Funny how you're always here fixing stuff but never say where you're from. What's your deal, Nate?" He fumbled the bulb, catching it before it dropped. "No deal," he said, keeping his voice light. "Just like helping out. That a crime in North Philly?" "Not yet," she said, eyes narrowing. "But I don't buy it. Guys don't just show up out of nowhere and stick around for free coffee and leaky roofs. You hiding something?" Nathan's gut twisted, but he forced a laugh, climbing down. "You're paranoid, Tasha. What am I hiding? Secret identity as a superhero?" She didn't laugh back. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just another creep with an angle. Lila trusts too easy. I don't." He opened his mouth to argue, but Lila's voice cut through. "Tasha, leave him alone. He's pulling his weight." She walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans, a half smile tugging at her lips. "Nate's cool, right?" "Yeah," he said, meeting her eyes, dark, steady, the kind that saw right through you. "Cool enough, I hope." "Cool enough," she echoed, smirking. "Grab your stuff. We're hitting the diner after. You're buying." The diner was a hole in the wall on Girard Avenue, all chipped formica tables and grease-stained menus. The jukebox hummed some old Motown tune, and the air smelled like fries and burnt toast. Nathan slid into a booth across from Lila, the vinyl squeaking under him, while Tasha took the spot next to her, still eyeing him like he might bolt. He'd swapped his hoodie for a flannel shirt, still cheap, Still not quite right, but Lila didn't seem to notice. She leaned back, sipping a Coke, her braids spilling over one shoulder. "So," she said, twirling the straw, "you never talk about yourself, Nate. What's your story? Don't say finance again, that's a cop-out." He grinned, stalling with a sip of his coffee. Black, bitter, perfect. "Not much to tell. Grew up around here, kinda. Family business stuff. I like keeping busy." "Uh-huh," she said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "That's vague as hell. You got a wife stashed somewhere? Kids? A dog?" No, and nah," he said, laughing. "Just me. What about you? How'd you end up running this circus?" Her smile softened, eyes drifting to the window where rain streaked the glass. "Always loved stories, books, plays, whatever. Grew up in North Philly. Saw too many kids like me get lost 'cause no one gave 'em a shot. My brother—" She stopped, swallowing hard, then shook it off. "Anyway, I teach lit at the high school. Started the hub program to keep 'em off the streets. It's not much, but it's mine." Nathan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to ask about her brother. Something in her voice said it wasn't a happy story, but he didn't push. "It's more than not much," he said instead. "Those kids light up around you. That's rare." She looked at him, really looked, and for a second, he thought she'd see through the whole damn act. But she just shrugged. "Guess I'm stubborn. What about you, Mr. Mystery? Why stick around?" He hesitated, the truth clawing at his throat. "I'm here because you make me feel something," but he went with, "You're good company, and the coffee's free." She laughed, deep and real, and it hit him like a punch. He was in deep, deeper than he'd meant to go. Back at the hub the next Sunday, things started fraying. Nathan was wrestling with a busted spotlight when Eli Hudson, his nephew, bounced in, all gangly limbs and a mop of dark hair. At 16, Eli was a ball of energy, obsessed with art and always bugging Nathan about real life outside the boardroom. Nathan had brought him along once, figuring he'd fit in with the kids. Big mistake. "Yo, Miss Lila," Eli called, dumping his backpack by the stage. "You got any parts left? I want to be like the bad guy or something." Lila grinned, tossing him a script. "We'll find you a spot, kid." "Nate, you didn't tell me you had a nephew this cool." "He's a handful," Nathan said, shooting Eli a look. "Keep it chill, man." But Eli was already chattering away. "Yeah, Uncle Nate's the best," he said, plopping onto a chair. "He's got this huge place in Center City, windows everywhere, views insane. You ever been up there, Miss Lila?" Nathan froze, the screwdriver slipping in his hand. Lila's head tilted, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Center City? Thought you said you were from around here, Nate." I move around," he said, scrambling. "Family stuff, like I said." "Family stuff," she echoed, smirking. But there was an edge to it now. Tasha, stacking props nearby, snorted loud enough to make it clear she'd heard. "Sounds fancy," Tasha said, not looking up. "What kind of family business puts you in a high-rise?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "Just work," he muttered, turning back to the spotlight like it'd save him. Eli, oblivious, kept going. "Yeah, he's got this sweet car too. A range." Until Nathan cut him off with a sharp, "Eli, focus. Help Tasha with those boxes." Eli shrugged and wandered off, but the damage was done. Lila watched Nathan a beat longer, something shifting behind her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or just a question she hadn't asked yet. That night, back in his penthouse, Nathan's phone lit up with a text from Mark Reynolds. "North Philly's stalling. Communities pissed. Protests starting. We need to demo by October or the investors walk. Call me." He stared at it, the city's lights sprawling out below him, cold and sharp. Mark didn't know about Lila, didn't know Nathan was spending half his life in a crumbling building pretending to be someone he wasn't. But the pressure was closing in. Hudson Global wanted the hub gone, and he was running out of time to figure out how to stop it. He tossed the phone aside, pacing to the window. Lila's voice rang in his head. "Those kids light up around you." And he saw his mom again, her gentle hands guiding him through lines for some community play, her smile fading when his dad sold her out. He'd built his life to never feel that again, to never need anyone. But Lila, she was cracking that wide open, and he didn't know how to hold it together. The mask was slipping, and he could feel it. Every laugh with Lila, every dodge of Tasha's questions, every slip from Eli. He was playing a game he couldn't win, and the stakes were climbing higher than he'd ever meant them to. Fall hit Philly like a slap, crisp air, leaves crunching underfoot, and a bite in the wind that cut through North Philly's narrow streets. The Arts Hub was buzzing tonight, a Thursday in late September, with kids scrambling to finish a backdrop for their big show next week. The room smelled like spray paint and popcorn, the ancient popcorn machine whirring in the corner while Tyrell argued with Keisha over who got to hold the brush. Nathan Hudson, still Nate to everyone here, stood by the stage, hammering nails into a wobbly prop table, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. He'd gotten good at this, blending in, keeping his head down, letting the chaos of the hub drown out the noise in his skull. Lila Brooks perched on a ladder nearby, stringing up fairy lights that flickered like fireflies against the cracked ceiling. She'd swapped her usual sweatshirt for a red Henley top, her braids swinging as she reached for the next hook. "Nate, you gonna hammer that thing into next week or what?" she called, smirking down at him. "We need it standing, not splinters." He grinned, wiping sweat off his brow with the back of his hand. "Patience, Brooks. I'm an artist. Takes time to perfect the craft." "Artist my ass," she shot back, laughing, that deep, real laugh that hit him every time. 3 months in, and he still couldn't get over it. How she made him feel like a regular guy, not the billionaire who owned half the city. They'd been dancing around something lately. Coffee turning into diner runs turning into late-night walks down Girard Avenue, talking about everything but the stuff he couldn't say. He was in too deep, and he knew it. The door banged open, cutting through the chatter. Tasha Carter stormed in, her raincoat dripping, a rolled-up newspaper clutched in her fist. Her eyes locked on Nathan, hard and cold, like she'd just found the last piece of a puzzle she'd been working on. "Lila," she said, voice sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Get over here. Now." Lila frowned, climbing down the ladder with a creak. "What's with you? You look like someone pissed in your coffee." Tasha didn't answer, just shoved the paper into Lila's hands. "Read it." Nathan's stomach dropped. He set the hammer down, slow, like he could delay whatever was coming. The kids kept painting, oblivious, but he felt the air shift, thicker, heavier. Lila unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the front page of the Philly Inquirer. The headline hit like a punch. Hudson Global sets sights on North Philly. Arts Hub faces demolition by year's end. Below it, a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of Nathan stepping out of his Range Rover downtown, suit on, hair slicked back, captioned, "CEO Nathan Hudson surveys latest acquisition." Lila's face went still, her fingers tightening on the paper. She looked up at him, slow, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Nate," she said, voice low, dangerous. "What the hell is this?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The room spun, Tyrell's laugh, Keisha's chatter, the hum of the popcorn machine, all fading into a dull roar. Tasha stepped forward, pointing at him like a prosecutor nailing a case. "That's him, Lila. Nathan Hudson. The guy who's been playing buddy with us while his company tears this place down. I told you he was full of shit." The kids stopped, heads turning. Eli poked his head out from behind the backdrop, frowning. "Uncle Nate, what's she talking about?" Lila's eyes flicked between the paper and Nathan, her breath hitching. "Uncle Nate," she echoed, soft, then louder. "Nathan Hudson. You're him?" "Lila, listen," he started, stepping toward her, hands up like he could stop the crash. His voice cracked, raw with panic. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," she cut in, her voice rising, sharp enough to echo off the walls. She threw the paper at his feet, the pages scattering. "You've been here, months, Nate, fixing lights, hauling chairs, drinking my damn coffee, and you're the one who's gonna bulldoze us? You're Hudson Global?" He flinched, the truth spilling out like blood. "Yeah, I'm Nathan Hudson, but I didn't come here to—" "To what?" she snapped, closing the gap between them, her eyes blazing. "To lie, to play some kind of game. You sat here, listened to me talk about these kids, about what this place means, and you're the one holding the wrecking ball." "No!" he shouted, louder than he meant, desperation clawing at him. "I came to scout it, yeah, but then I met you. I stayed because of you, Lila. I've been trying to stop this." "Stop it?" She laughed, bitter and jagged, cutting him off. "You're the CEO, asshole. You don't stop anything, you make it happen. You think I'm dumb enough to buy that?" Tasha shoved in beside her, fists clenched. "Get out, Hudson. You don't belong here, never did. Go back to your tower and leave us the hell alone." "Lila, please," he said, voice breaking, reaching for her arm. She jerked back, her face twisting with something worse than anger. Hurt. Betrayal. He'd seen that look before in his mom's eyes when his dad sold her out, and it gutted him all over again. "You don't get to touch me," she said, quiet now, the words slicing deep. "You don't get to stand there and act like you care. Everything, every word, every laugh, it was a lie. You're just another suit who thinks he can buy whatever he wants, even us." "It wasn't a lie," he said, stepping closer despite Tasha's glare, rain from his hair dripping onto the floor. "You're the realest thing I've ever known. I swear I—" "Get out," she said, turning away, her voice flat. "Now." The room went silent, the kids staring, Eli's mouth open like he'd just seen a ghost. Nathan stood there, chest heaving, the weight of every eye on him. He wanted to fight, to grab her and make her listen, but her back was a wall he couldn't climb. He grabbed his jacket, the fabric cold and damp, and walked out into the night, the door slamming shut behind him like a gunshot. Friday morning, Nathan's office at Hudson Global felt like a cage. The glass walls reflected the city below, Center City's towers gleaming, North Philly, a dark smudge on the horizon. He hadn't slept, hadn't shaved, his eyes red from staring at the ceiling all night. Mark Reynolds sat across from him, tablet in hand, his tie loose like he'd been up too long, too. "You see the Inquirer?" Mark said, smirking. "Someone tipped him off. North Philly's all over it now. Protests starting tomorrow. You gonna sign off on the demo or what?" Nathan's jaw tightened, his hands clenched on the desk. "Who leaked it?" Mark shrugged, too casual. "Doesn't matter. Point is, we're bleeding time. Investors want this wrapped by October, or they're out. What's the holdup, man? You've been off your game for weeks." Nathan stared at him, suspicion flickering. Mark had been pushing hard lately, too hard. "I'll handle it," he said, voice low. "Push the timeline back. I need a week." "A week?" Mark laughed, sharp. "You're kidding. The board's gonna eat you alive. What's with you, Nate? You're acting like some schmuck who's lost his edge." "Maybe I have," Nathan muttered, standing, pacing to the window. Lila's face flashed in his head. Those eyes that— "Get out," she said, turning away, her voice flat. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and final. Nathan stood there, rooted to the spot, rain dripping from his hair onto the scuffed floor of the North Philly Arts Hub. The kids stared, Tyrell wide-eyed, Keisha clutching her script like a shield, while Tasha Carter loomed beside Lila, arms crossed, ready to throw him out herself if he didn't move. "Lila, wait!" Nathan's voice cracked, raw and desperate, but she didn't turn back. She walked to the stage, picking up a paint can like it was the only thing keeping her steady, her shoulders stiff under the red Henley top. He took a step forward, ignoring Tasha's glare, his Converse squeaking on the wet boards. "I didn't mean for this. I've been trying to figure out how to stop it, I swear." "Stop it?" Lila spun around, her eyes flashing, paint can slamming onto the table with a clang that echoed through the room. "You're Nathan Hudson, man. You don't try. You do. You've got billions, a whole damn company, and you're telling me you couldn't stop this? What have you been doing these months? Playing house down here while your suits cash out on our homes?" Her words hit like punches, each one landing harder than the last. Nathan's chest tightened, the truth spilling out messy and unpolished. "I didn't want it to go this far. I came here to scout the place, yeah, but then I met you. I stayed because of you, Lila, because this—" He waved a hand at the hub, the kids, the flickering lights. "This is real, more real than anything up in my tower. I've been fighting the board, stalling them." "Stalling?" Tasha barked, stepping between them, her voice dripping with scorn. "You're the CEO, Hudson. You don't stall. You sign the checks. Don't feed us that crap about fighting. You've been lying to her face, to all of us, while your bulldozers line up outside." "I'm not lying about this," he shouted, louder than he meant, his hands balling into fists. "I've been buying time, telling them the numbers don't work, pushing back deadlines. I didn't want to lose this. Lose you." Lila's laugh cut through, sharp and hollow, like broken glass. "Lose me? You never had me, Nate. Or Nathan, or whoever the hell you are. You think showing up here hauling chairs makes you one of us? You're a tourist, man, slumming it down here for kicks while your real life waits uptown." "That's not true," he said, voice low, stepping closer despite the wall of tension between them. "You don't get it. I've spent years building walls, keeping everyone out. My mom, she was like you, believed in places like this, and my dad crushed her for it. I swore I'd never let anyone in again. But you—" He stopped, throat tight, rain still dripping from his sleeves. "You got through. I didn't plan this, Lila. I didn't plan you." Her eyes flickered, something soft breaking through the anger just for a second, then hardened again. "Don't," she said, quiet but firm. "Don't pull that sob story on me. You don't get to use your messed up past to excuse this. You knew what this place meant. Knew it every time I talked about these kids, every time we stayed late. And you still let it happen." "I didn't," he started, but she cut him off, turning to Tasha. "Get him out." Tasha didn't hesitate, grabbing his arm with a grip that said she'd drag him if she had to. "You heard her, Hudson. Move." Nathan yanked free, his jaw tight, locking eyes with Lila one last time. "I'm not the enemy here," he said, voice breaking. "I'll fix this. I swear I will." She didn't answer, just turned back to the stage, her hands shaking as she picked up the paintbrush. Tasha shoved him toward the door, and the kids watched, silent now, the air thick with confusion and betrayal. Eli stepped forward, his backpack slung over one shoulder, frowning. "Uncle Nate, what's going on? Why are they mad?" "Not now, Eli," Nathan muttered, pushing past him. The door slammed shut behind him, the rain hitting his face like needles as he stumbled into the night. He didn't go home. Couldn't face the penthouse, the cold glass, the empty bourbon bottles, the view that mocked him with every glittering light. Instead, he drove aimlessly through Philly, the Range Rover's wipers slapping a rhythm against the storm. His phone buzzed. Mark Reynolds, texting. Board's pissed. North Philly's locked in. Demo starts November. Where you at? Nathan tossed it onto the passenger seat, his knuckles white on the wheel. He ended up at the Schuylkill River, parking by the water's edge where the city's glow reflected in jagged streaks. The rain hammered the roof, loud enough to drown out the mess in his head, but not enough to erase Lila's face. Those eyes, cutting through him like she'd seen every lie he'd ever told. He'd screwed up. Big time. 3 months of pretending, of dodging, of letting himself believe he could keep this separate, and it had all blown up in his face. His mom's voice crept in, soft and faded. Places like this matter, Nate. They're where people find themselves. She'd died believing that, fighting for it, even when his dad sold her community center for a quick profit and walked out. Nathan had buried that part of himself, built Hudson Global to prove he didn't need anyone. That money was armor. But Lila, she'd cracked it open, and now it was bleeding out all over him. He grabbed his phone, scrolling to Mark's text, typing fast. Hold off on North Philly, I need more time. He hit send, knowing it wouldn't fly. Mark would push back, the board would push harder, and the clock was ticking. But he couldn't let it end like this. Not with Lila thinking he'd played her. Not with the hub turning to rubble under his name. Friday morning, Nathan sat in his office at Hudson Global. The city sprawled out below like a chessboard he'd mastered. Until now. The room smelled like leather and coffee. His desk littered with reports on North Philly. Profit projections, demolition schedules, investor demands. Mark slouched in the chair across from him, tie loose, his sharp eyes drilling holes. You're stalling again, Mark said, tapping the tablet in his hand. The board's losing patience, Nate. Community's kicking up a fuss, petitions, protests, some chick named Brooks leading the charge. We need to move or cut our losses. Nathan's jaw tightened at her name, his fingers curling around a pen. I said I'm handling it, he snapped, sharper than he meant. Push the demo back. Tell him we're reassessing. Mark raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. Reassessing? Since when do you reassess a done deal? What's with you, man? You've been off, missing meetings, dodging calls. This about that arts place? It's not... Nathan stopped, rubbing his face. It's complicated. Just buy me a month. Mark smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Complicated's not a word you use, Nate. You're the guy who closes deals, not the guy who waffles. If I didn't know better, I'd say you're going soft. Watch it, Nathan said, voice low. But Mark just shrugged, standing. Your funeral, man. Board meets Tuesday. They'll want answers. Don't say I didn't warn you. The door clicked shut, leaving Nathan alone with the hum of the AC and a headache pounding behind his eyes. He grabbed the North Philly file, flipping to a photo of the hub. Kids painting, Lila laughing in the background. His chest ached, sharp and unfamiliar. He'd lost her, not just tonight, but everything they'd built. And worse, he'd lost it because he'd been too damn scared to tell her the truth from the jump. He stood, pacing to the window, the city staring back, cold, indifferent. Mark was right. The board wouldn't wait. Hudson Global didn't do sentiment. It did profit. But Nathan, he wasn't sure what he did anymore. All he knew was Lila's voice, calling him a liar, and the look in her eyes when she turned away. He'd built an empire to keep the world out, but she'd gotten in, and now he was drowning in it. He grabbed his keys, the decision settling heavy in his gut. He'd fix this, or die trying. Because losing her wasn't just losing a fight. It was losing the one damn thing that had made him feel alive. Lila just kicked Nathan to the curb. Did that showdown rip your heart out? Smash that subscribe button to see if he can claw his way back, and drop a comment. Team Lila or Team Nathan? Let's hear it. The rain came back with a vengeance that Monday night, hammering North Philly, like it had a score to settle. The streets were a mess, puddles pooling under flickering streetlights, trash bags floating down alleys, the wind howling through the row houses. Nathan Hudson stood in the parking lot of the Arts Hub, his hoodie soaked through, staring at the building he'd helped paint just weeks ago. The Save Our Kids sign swayed in the storm, its red letters bleeding into the wet wood. He hadn't been back since Lila threw him out, but tonight he couldn't stay away, not after what he'd heard. Hudson Global's board had called an emergency meeting that afternoon, 30 floors up in their glass tower downtown. Mark Reynolds had laid it out cold. North Philly was locked in, demolition set for mid-November, no more delays. Community's making noise, Mark had said, smirking across the polished table. But we've got the permits. Investors are done waiting, Nate. Sign off or they're pulling out, and they're looking at me to step up if you don't. The board nodded along. Old men in suits who didn't give a damn about some arts program in a neighborhood they'd never set foot in. Nathan had fought back, voice tight, arguing for a reassessment, but Mark's eyes said it all. You're done. Now, standing in the rain, Nathan's phone buzzed. Mark again. Board's voting Tuesday. Your call. He shoved it in his pocket, the cold seeping into his bones. He'd built this company to keep control, to never feel the helplessness his mom had when his dad sold her out. But Lila, she'd torn that apart, and he was losing everything because of it. The hub's door cracked open, spilling warm light onto the wet pavement. Lila stepped out, her denim jacket zipped tight, a trash bag slung over her shoulder. She froze when she saw him, her face hardening under the street lamp's glow. "What the hell are you doing here?" she called, voice sharp over the rain. "I had to see you," he said, stepping closer, water streaming down his face. "Lila, listen." "No," she cut him off, dropping the bag with a wet thud. "You don't get to show up like this, Nathan. You're not welcome here. Go back to your tower." "I can't," he said, voice rough, taking another step. "They're tearing this place down. November. I tried to stop it, but the board's overriding me. I'm out of moves unless... Unless what?" she snapped, crossing her arms, rain dripping off her braids. "You throw some money at it? Play hero? I told you we don't need your savior bullshit." "Lila, it's not like that," he shouted, desperation clawing at him. "I'm losing everything, my company, my name, trying to fix this. I don't care about the money, I care about you." She laughed, bitter and cold, cutting through the storm. "You care about me? You lied to my face for months, Nathan. You sat here, listened to me talk about my brother, how he got shot because there was no place like this back then, and you're the one taking it away. How do you sleep at night?" "I don't," he said, stepping into her space, close enough to see the hurt in her eyes. "I haven't slept since you kicked me out. You think I wanted this? I've been fighting them, Mark, the board, every damn day to save this place. I screwed up, Lila. I know I did. But it's not too late." She stared at him, rain blurring the edges of her face, then shook her head. "Too late for what? For us? For this?" She waved at the hub. "You're Hudson Global, man. You don't fix, you destroy." Before he could answer, headlights flared, slicing through the rain. A pickup truck screeched into the lot, tires skidding on wet asphalt. 3 guys jumped out, big, rough, hoods up, carrying bats and crowbars. Nathan's gut sank. "Lila, get back." "What the—" she started, but one of them swung a bat at the hub's front window, glass shattering with a crash that echoed over the storm. The others moved fast, smashing lights, kicking over trash cans, their laughter cutting through the rain. Nathan reacted on instinct, grabbing Lila and pulling her behind him as a bat swung his way. He ducked, the air whooshing past his ear, then tackled the guy, slamming him into the pavement. Pain shot through his shoulder. Something tore. But he didn't stop, pinning the guy's arm until the bat clattered free. "Stay down," he yelled, voice hoarse. Lila lunged for a crowbar. One of them dropped, swinging it at another attacker's legs. He yelped, stumbling, but the third guy grabbed her arm, twisting it back. She grunted, kicking his shin hard enough to make him let go, then spun to Nathan. "Who the hell are these guys?" "Don't know," he shouted, shoving his guy down again as sirens wailed in the distance. The attackers froze, then bolted for the truck, peeling out into the night, taillights fading into the rain. Nathan staggered to his feet, shoulder throbbing, blood mixing with the water on his hands. Lila dropped the crowbar, breathing hard, her eyes wild. "What was that?" she demanded, turning on him. "Your people?" "No," he said, wincing as he stood. "I'd never. I think it's Mark. He's been pushing me out, wants the demo done. This smells like him." "Mark?" She stepped closer, rain streaming down her face. "Your CFO? You're telling me your own guy's trashing my place to get to you?" "Yeah," he said, voice low, meeting her eyes. "He's making a play, scaring you off, pinning it on me. I'll prove it, Lila. I'll stop him." She stared at him, chest heaving, then shook her head. "Prove it? I don't even know who you are anymore. I found out something today. Your company wasn't the only one after the hub. I took money from Pinnacle last year, your rival, to keep us afloat. You gonna tell me that's a coincidence?" Nathan's blood ran cold. Pinnacle, Hudson Global's biggest competitor, the ones who'd been sniffing around North Philly for years. "You what?" he said, stepping back, the rain suddenly louder. "You're working with them." "Working with them?" she snapped. "I took a grant to save this place. Didn't know they were playing me till last week. And you've been here knowing your company's the hammer, and now Pinnacle's in it too? What's your game, Nathan?" "There's no game," he yelled, voice breaking. "I didn't know about Pinnacle. I've been trying to protect you, not play you. He stopped, the words spilling out before he could catch them. "I love you, Lila. That's why I'm here, bleeding in this damn lot. I love you, and I'm not letting this go." She froze, rain dripping off her lashes, her breath visible in the cold. For a second he thought she'd soften, thought she'd hear him, but her face hardened. "Love me?" she said, quiet, deadly. "You don't lie to someone you love. You don't build a life on secrets and expect it to stand." "Lila," he started, reaching for her, but she backed away, shaking her head. "Go," she said, voice trembling. "Fix your mess, Nathan. But don't come back till you've got something real to show me. Not words, not promises. I'm done." He stood there, rain pounding, shoulders screaming, watching her walk back to the hub, the broken glass crunching under her boots. The sirens grew louder. Cops coming, too late to matter. He'd lost her, again, and this time it felt final. Tuesday morning, Nathan sat in Hudson Global's boardroom, the air thick with cologne and tension. His shoulder was bandaged under his suit, a dull ache he ignored. Mark stood at the head, pitching hard, demolition timelines, profit margins, while the board nodded like puppets. "Nathan's dragging his feet," Mark said, glancing his way. "We need to move, or we're sunk." Nathan stood slow, his voice cutting through. "Mark's right. We're late. But not because I'm soft. Because I've been digging." He tossed a folder onto the table, photos of the pickup truck, grainy security footage, texts from a burner phone traced to Mark's assistant. "He sent those guys to trash the hub, scare the community, force my hand. He's playing you." The room went still, Mark's smirk vanishing. "That's bullshit," he spat, but his voice shook. "You've got no proof. Check the logs." Nathan said, cold. "I'm done covering for you. Vote me out if you want. I'm not signing off on this." The board murmured, heads turning. Mark's face reddened, but Nathan didn't wait. Walked out, the door slamming behind him. He was on the edge, company slipping, Lila gone, but he wasn't done fighting. That rain-soaked chaos just flipped everything. Did Nathan's confession or Lila's rejection hit you hardest? Hit that subscribe button to see if he can claw his way back, and tell me in the comments, can he save the hub? And Lila? Let's hear it. The rain didn't stop Tuesday night. It just got colder, turning Philadelphia into a gray, dripping maze. Nathan Hudson sat in his Range Rover, parked 2 blocks from Hudson Global's tower in Center City, the engine off, the quiet pressing in. His shoulder throbbed under the bandage, a dull reminder of the chaos at the Arts Hub last night. Broken glass, Lila's voice cutting him down, those thugs disappearing into the storm. He'd walked out of the boardroom that afternoon with Mark's betrayal laid bare, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like a cliff, and he was teetering on the edge. His phone buzzed. Eli, texting. "Uncle Nate, you okay? Heard about the hub. Kids are freaked." Nathan stared at it, thumbs hovering, then typed back. "I'm fixing it. Stay with Lila. Keep her safe." He hit send, the words hollow. Fixing it. How? The board was voting tomorrow. Mark was scrambling to save his ass, and Lila wouldn't even look at him. He'd lost her, lost everything, and the only thing keeping him going was the fire she'd lit in him, the one he hadn't felt since his mom died. He climbed out, the rain soaking his hoodie again, and started walking. Not to the penthouse, too empty, too cold, but toward North Philly. He didn't know why, didn't have a plan, just needed to move. The streets blurred past, neon signs flickering, horns blaring, the Schuylkill River a dark ribbon under the storm. By the time he hit Girard Avenue, his sneakers were squishing, his breath puffing out in the chill. The hub loomed ahead, dark except for a single light in the window. Lila, probably, still cleaning up the mess he'd helped make. He stopped across the street, hands shoved in his pockets, watching her shadow move inside. He'd built an empire to never feel this, helpless, exposed, but here he was, bleeding out in the rain for a woman who hated him. And he didn't blame her. She was right. He'd lied, he'd stalled, he'd let it get this far. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Wednesday morning broke gray and raw, the boardroom at Hudson Global humming with tension. Nathan stood at the head of the table, unshaven, still in yesterday's clothes, his shoulders stiff under a borrowed suit jacket. The board, 10 suits with grim faces, watched him like vultures. Mark Reynolds at the far end, arms crossed, his smirk gone. The folder Nathan had dropped yesterday sat in the middle, its contents, photos, texts, proof of Mark's sabotage, scattered like shrapnel. "Mark hired those guys," Nathan said, voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at him. "Sent them to trash the hub, scare the community, pin it on me. He's been playing you, pushing me out to take my spot. Check the burner logs, the truck plates. It's all there." Mark shot up, face red. "This is bullshit, Nate. You're spinning this 'cause you're soft, dragging your feet over some arts shack. Sit down," Chairman Ed Voss barked, slamming a hand on the table. The old man grabbed the folder, flipping through it, his frown deepening. "This says you texted, 'Handle it tonight,' same time the hub got hit. Explain that, Reynolds." Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's fabricated. He's framing me." "Shut up," Voss snapped, nodding to security at the door. "Get him out. We'll deal with this later." 2 guards hauled Mark up, his protest fading down the hall. "You're screwing yourselves, Nate." Until the door clicked shut. The room went quiet, Voss turning to Nathan. "You've got 5 minutes. This North Philly mess. What's your play?" Nathan took a breath, the weight of it all crashing down. Lila's face, the hub's broken windows, his mom's voice whispering about places that matter. "We're scrapping the demo," he said, firm. "Hudson Global's pulling out of North Philly, full stop. I'm setting up a fund instead. 10 million to start, renovating the hub, keeping it community run. No condos, no profit. That's my call." The board erupted. Shouts, curses, Voss rubbing his temples. 10 million? A gray-haired suit sputtered. "That's a write-off we can't take. Shareholders'll bury us." "They'll live," Nathan cut in cold. "Long-term, it's better. Community trust, tax breaks, PR. You want numbers? I'll get 'em. But this isn't a debate. I'm out if it doesn't happen." Voss stared, hard, then sighed. "You're a pain in my ass, Hudson. Vote's yours, barely, but you're on thin ice." Nathan nodded, walking out before they could change their minds. He'd won, for now, but it didn't feel like enough. Not yet. That night, he drove to Lila's place, a cramped row house off Broad Street, the porch sagging, a single light glowing inside. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, just showed up, rain soaking him through again as he pressed the buzzer. Minutes stretched, his heart pounding, until her voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and tired. "Go away, Nathan." 5 minutes, he said, leaning close, water dripping off his hood. "Please." A long pause. Then the door buzzed open. She stood in the doorway, no makeup, hair pulled back, eyes red like she'd been crying or not sleeping. 5 minutes, she said, letting him in, but not offering a seat. He stood, dripping onto her rug, the small living room cluttered with books and photos, her with kids, her with a guy who looked like her, smiling, gone now. "I stopped it," he said, voice low. "The demo's off. Hub stays. I'm funding it. 10 million, no strings. It's yours, Lila, all of it." She laughed, dry and humorless, crossing her arms. "So you're throwing money at it, cleaning your conscience with a check. Real noble." "It's not about that," he said, stepping closer, wincing as his shoulder twinged. "I'm not asking forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I lied, I messed up, and I'll carry that. But this—" he gestured vaguely, rain still clinging to his hands. "This is because of you. You showed me what I had forgotten, what my mom died believing in. I'm not the guy I was when I walked in here." Her eyes flickered, softening for a heartbeat, then hardening again. "You don't get it," she said, voice breaking. "It's not the money. It's the trust. You didn't tell me who you were, Nathan. I let you in, talked about my brother, my kids, and you kept me in the dark. How do I believe anything now?" "You don't have to," he said, raw, meeting her gaze. "I was a coward, scared you'd see me as just another suit, scared I'd lose you. But I love you, Lila. I've loved you since that first night, and I'll spend every damn day proving it if you let me." She stared, rain tapping the window, her breath hitching. "And if I don't?" "Then I lose the only thing that matters," he said, voice steady despite the ache. "But the hub's still yours. No strings, no bargaining. I'm done playing games." She studied him, long and silent, then sighed. "I need time, Nathan. Not promises. Time." He nodded, stepping back. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." As he turned to leave, she called, "Nathan?" He looked back. "Next time, start with the truth. It's cheaper than all this." He smiled, faint but real, and walked out into the rain, the door clicking shut behind him. A year later, North Philly glowed under a rare December sun. The Arts Hub, now the Hudson Brooks Arts Hub, standing tall with fresh paint and new windows. Lila cut the ribbon, kids cheering around her, Tyrell and Keisha waving from the stage. Nathan stood in the back. No suit, just a hoodie and jeans, his breath visible in the cold. He'd stepped down as CEO 6 months ago, handed the reins to Voss, poured everything into the fund. 20 million now, scholarships included. He wasn't rich anymore, not like before, but he wasn't empty either. Lila caught his eye, nodding him over. They'd been slow, coffee first, then talks, then work side by side on the hub. She hadn't forgiven him, not fully, but she'd let him in, inch by inch. "You did good?" she said, her voice soft but firm, handing him a coffee. Still shitty, still warm. "We did," he said, taking it, their fingers brushing. "You still kicking my ass if I screw up?" "Count on it," she said, smirking, that half-smile he'd fallen for. They stood there, the city stretching out around them, not fixed, not perfect, but theirs. He'd built an empire once. Now he was building something better with her. Nathan and Lila found a new start. Did that slow burn hit you in the feels? Smash that subscribe button for more epic tales and drop a comment. What's your takeaway from their journey? Let's chat.